Jonas fired his rifle for the first time in 3 years, but the target wasn't a wild animal. The echo rolled off the canyon walls like thunder chasing itself, then vanished into the vast silence that had blanketed this valley since the day he stopped being part of the world. He didn't lower the rifle right away. His fingers, calloused and firm from splitting wood and rebuilding fences, tightened on the stock, as if expecting a second shot. But nothing stirred. No deer, no coyote. Just the memory of the sound, loud and violent in a place that had forgotten what noise felt like. Jonas lowered the gun and exhaled through his nose. The morning heat was already rising, curling the distant horizon in waves of shimmering distortion. Dust clung to the sleeves of his shirt, to the sweat on his neck. He blinked up at the sun with a squint that had been carved into his face like a permanent feature. 3 years ago, he'd fired that same rifle at a man, or tried to. But his hands had frozen, his resolve had crumbled, and she was gone. Annie. He never spoke her name out loud anymore, not even to the desert. Now the cabin behind him creaked under the breeze, the old boards complaining as if they too remembered the day she was taken. There were no flowers on her grave, no grave at all, just a memory that refused to fade, and a house that smelled like dust and guilt. This place, tucked deep in a forgotten Arizona valley, had become his penance. The nearest town was 2 days' ride through terrain that broke horses and men alike. No mail came, no visitors dared. The kind of isolation Jonas had chosen wasn't just physical, it was surgical, a clean amputation from humanity. Each day passed with the precision of habit. Wake before sunrise, tend the garden, haul water from the well, split logs, avoid the mirror. Avoid thinking, until today. The rifle had gone off because of instinct, a flicker of movement near the southern fence line, a glint of something that didn't belong in this patch of nowhere. He'd aimed before his mind had caught up. And now, standing on his porch, squinting into the light, Jonas felt something he hadn't in a long time: unease. He stepped off the porch, boots crunching over dry earth. The fence stretched into the horizon like a boundary line between past and present, his land, his silence, his exile. Then he saw it. Not an animal, not a trick alight, a shape, no, several, dragging themselves toward the gate. 5 figures, human, limping. One collapsed entirely, dust rising around her like smoke. Another tried to lift her, only to fall beside her. Women. Jonas froze, his breath caught between disbelief and dread. They were filthy, torn, sunburnt, barely more than shadows in the heat haze. But there was no mistaking what they were: survivors of something terrible. And they had found him, the one man who had spent years praying no one ever would. He didn't move, didn't wave, didn't speak, just watched as one of the women, the tallest, with red hair matted against her forehead, looked up. Her voice cracked like brittle wood. "Please," she said, "they're hunting us." And just like that, the silence Jonas Callen had wrapped himself in shattered. If you were Jonas, would you stick to the quiet or face the danger? Tell me in the comments. His next move changes everything. For a heartbeat, Jonas didn't move. The red-haired woman's voice had cracked the air like a whip, raw and full of something he hadn't heard in a long time. Not just desperation, but finality. The kind that came when a person had exhausted every other option. He kept the rifle lowered, but didn't let go. "They're hunting us," she repeated, louder this time, though her voice wavered under the strain. Her eyes, wide, green, rimmed with exhaustion, locked with his. Behind her, one of the girls, couldn't be more than 16, lay face down in the dirt, unmoving. Another knelt beside her, holding a rag against her forehead, whispering something that didn't reach his ears. Two more staggered behind them, clinging to each other, dust clinging to their shredded skirts and bruised limbs like a second skin. Jonas took a slow step forward. This wasn't a hallucination. This wasn't a test. This was real. He didn't ask how they'd found him. No one was supposed to. The canyon swallowed trails like a grave. The only way here was through sheer will, or sheer terror. One of the women tried to stand, stumbled, and collapsed again. Her arm was bleeding through the fabric, the wound red and angry. The youngest, the feverish one, groaned faintly, her body twitching with what looked like delirium. And still Jonas hesitated. He'd built his life here on one rule: don't get involved. The last time he'd broken that rule, he lost everything. But then the red-haired woman, the one who'd spoken, took a single step closer. Just one. Her legs buckled. She caught herself on the gatepost and looked up at him, teeth clenched against pain. "My name is Eliza Ward," she said, barely above a whisper. "We haven't eaten in 2 days. We lost our horses, our wagon. Our guide was shot." She swallowed. "We're not thieves. We're not trying to take anything from you. We just need a place to breathe, just for a moment." Jonas looked at her, truly looked. Not just at the filth or the blood, but at the bruises on her neck, the old rope burns on her wrists. These weren't just refugees. They were running from something human, or something wearing the face of it. And something in his chest, long buried, long denied, began to stir. Still his voice came out flat. "You're not supposed to be here." "I know," Eliza said. "Believe me, we didn't want to be." Behind her, the girl with the fever began to seize. Her limbs jerked violently. The others cried out. That broke him. Jonas lowered the rifle and muttered a curse under his breath. Then he moved, fast, crossed the yard in long, purposeful strides, and reached the girl's side just as she stopped shaking. He lifted her, light as driftwood, hot as a forge, into his arms. Her breath was shallow, but still there. "Inside," he said, not looking at the others. "Now, all of you." And with that, the man who hadn't opened his door for another soul in 3 years did exactly that. The cabin door groaned on its hinges, protesting like a forgotten promise. Jonas kicked it open with his boot, cradling the unconscious girl against his chest. The inside was sparse. 1 bed, a table, a chair, shelves lined with jars of dried beans and jerky, and a wood stove that hadn't been lit in days. No pictures, no softness, no signs that anyone had ever loved or lived here, and maybe that was the point. He laid the girl down on the bed. Her skin burned under his calloused hands, and her breathing was ragged, like someone dragging air up from the bottom of a well. Fever, dehydration, maybe worse. The other women followed him in without asking, their eyes wide, their steps tentative. Eliza paused at the threshold, her gaze sweeping the room with a kind of haunted awareness. "You're alone," she said softly. "By choice," Jonas replied, already turning toward the shelf to grab a water canteen. He tossed it to May, the one who'd followed closest behind. "Cool her down. Not too fast." Eliza stepped closer. "We won't stay. We just need time." "You'll die if you leave now," he said bluntly, glancing at the closed door. "And if they're following you, I just invited death into my house." A pause. Jonas looked at them, really looked. He saw pain, exhaustion, and something else, defiance. The same fire Annie had carried to the end. He sighed, then moved to bar the door. "Guess I'm in it now," he muttered. Jonas moved like a man waking from a long sleep, stiff, uncertain, but with purpose. He placed the feverish girl, Mira, on the bed, her body trembling and slick with sweat. The mattress creaked under her weight, a sound foreign to the cabin that hadn't held a guest in over 3 years. He retrieved a canteen from the shelf and handed it to May, the woman with steady hands and hollow eyes. "Dampen a cloth," he said. "Not too cold, don't shock her." May nodded and got to work. Beside her, Eliza winced as she slumped into the single chair. Jonas knelt beside her, inspecting the gash on her thigh. The fabric of her skirt was stiff with dried blood, and the skin below was angry, swollen. "This'll sting," he muttered, pouring water from the canteen onto a rag. Eliza didn't flinch. "You live here alone?" "By design." "Why?" He didn't answer. Instead, he focused on cleaning the wound, slow, methodical, deliberate. His hands, more used to chopping wood and fixing hinges, were oddly gentle. The silence between them thickened, not awkward, but weighted, like a bridge half built. "You don't have to help us," Eliza said softly. "I know." "So why are you?" Jonas paused, still holding the rag. Outside, the wind shifted, rattling the shutter. In the sound, he heard a memory, a voice he hadn't let himself recall in years. "If someone asks for help and you can give it, you don't turn your back. That's what good men do." Annie's voice, bright and clear, like a bell struck inside his chest. Jonas didn't speak. He pressed the cloth to Eliza's leg, saw her jaw tighten against the pain, and then moved to check Mira again. The girl's eyes fluttered under closed lids. Her lips moved, forming words only she could hear. "She's burning up," May said. "Won't last long without medicine." Jonas glanced toward the cabinet, then opened it. A few bottles lined the shelf, remnants from another life. One was fever powder, old but likely still good. He handed it over. "Mix it in warm water, small sips." May nodded. There was gratitude in her face, but also something more. Disbelief, maybe? Or hope? Jonas turned toward the stove and began building a fire. He hadn't cooked for anyone but himself since Annie. Now the cabin was full of strangers and tension, and yet it felt less empty than it had in years. As the fire caught, Eliza's voice broke the quiet. "She talked about you, you know?" Jonas froze, his hand on the kettle. "Annie," Eliza said, "in the wagon. She believed you'd come." His throat tightened. "She was wrong," he said. "She wasn't," Eliza replied. "You just came late." He didn't respond, didn't move, but the kettle, already full, began to steam. Hooked yet? Subscribe now so you don't miss a single twist in Jonas's journey. Eliza's voice came low but clear, as if each word weighed more than she could afford to carry. "We weren't always 5, she said, watching the fire flicker behind the kettle. "We started as 12. Jonas didn't look at her. He stirred the pot with the dull end of a spoon, but the rhythm slowed. 12 women, she continued, signed up for teaching posts out west. Said we'd get free travel, room and board, a stipend. Sounded like a dream." Jonas set the spoon down hard enough to clatter against the iron rim. "Who signed you up?" She met his gaze. "A man with a badge." That stopped him cold. "Marshal?" he asked, though he already knew. "Silas Granger," she confirmed. "Federal badge, official letterhead. Said we'd be placed in frontier towns needing moral guidance and education." Jonas stepped back from the stove. The heat no longer came from the flames, but from somewhere deep inside him, old coals reigniting. "He took us through a side trail," Eliza continued. "Said it was faster. Then, the second night, we woke up without our boots, without our papers, without our choices." She looked away, jaw clenched. "He sold us," she said, "like livestock, to a man who ran a compound across the border. Barbed wire, dogs, guards. Men who treated women like stock feed." Jonas sat down heavily on the wooden bench. He had heard of such places, whispers, rumors, tales exchanged in hushed voices in mining camps and saloons. But hearing it now, from someone who survived it, made it real. "And Annie?" he asked. His voice was a rasp. Eliza nodded slowly. "She was already there, one of the early ones, maybe a year before us." Jonas closed his eyes. That meant she hadn't died right away. She'd lived, endured, alone. "She used to talk about her husband," Eliza said, "how he was smart, quiet, thought too much. She believed he'd come for her, said he had to be out there somewhere, building a plan." He opened his eyes but didn't lift his head. "She was wrong," he said again. "No," Eliza replied, her voice sharpening. "She wasn't. You just didn't know where to look. Granger made sure of that." A heavy silence fell between them. The only sound was the low moan of wind against the walls and Mira's labored breathing behind them. "She fought," Eliza added, "hard, broke a man's nose, bit off a piece of another. They punished her. She never cried, never begged." Jonas felt something shift inside him, the slow unraveling of a knot he'd carried in his chest for years. "She said your name," Eliza whispered, "every night, not pleading, remembering, like a compass pointing north." He stood, not trusting his voice, and walked to the door. Outside, the stars were beginning to prick the sky, silent witnesses to a world that had failed someone it should have saved. The night air slapped Jonas in the face like a cold reminder. He stood at the edge of the porch, hands gripping the railing, staring into the vast dark. His knuckles whitened. The silence outside was heavier now, loaded with knowledge he'd spent years avoiding. Annie hadn't died quickly. She'd suffered, fought, believed in him, until her last breath. Behind him, Eliza rose. Her steps were slow, stiff from injury, but deliberate. She joined him without a word, standing just far enough to respect the boundary he hadn't yet decided to lower. "She used to hum," Eliza said after a moment, "a hymn about coming home, even when she knew she never would." Jonas exhaled sharply. "I begged her to stay behind," he said. "I knew Granger wasn't right. I felt it, but I was too scared to fight him." "You weren't the only one he fooled." "No," Jonas said, "but I was the only one who let him take her." The admission felt like gravel in his throat, but once spoken, it settled differently. Less poison, more truth. Eliza didn't argue. She let the silence stretch again, then offered something unexpected. "You still have a chance, Jonas, not to fix the past, but to stop it from happening again." He turned to her then. The firelight from the cabin caught her face, the bruises, the cuts, the exhaustion, but her eyes burned steady. "Granger isn't just running a racket," she said. "He's part of something bigger. There are men in 3 territories who protect him. He trades in people like they're commodities. They have routes, buyers, code names, papers, real ones, stamped, sealed." Jonas felt the air thicken around him. This wasn't just about vengeance. It was about exposure, about pulling a thread in a web so tightly woven it looked like government. "You sure?" Eliza nodded once. "We're not just fugitives. We're evidence." A beat. Then Jonas said, "Then we better make sure you live long enough to testify." The wind had changed. Jonas tasted it first, that dry bite in the air that meant riders were moving. He stepped off the porch and crouched near the edge of the clearing, scanning the ridgeline. Then he saw it, dust, rising in the distance, curling like smoke from a fire. At least 6 horses, moving fast. Too fast for travelers, too direct to be coincidence. He stood, stepped back into the cabin, and locked the door behind him. "They're coming," he said. May straightened from Mira's bedside. "How long?" Jonas didn't answer right away. He moved to the back wall, opened a trap beneath the floorboards, and pulled out an old canvas sack. Inside, 2 revolvers, a box of bullets, and a sawed-off shotgun. Tools from a life he'd buried under sweat and shame. Hour, maybe less. Eliza, still seated but more alert now, wiped sweat from her brow. "Then we don't have much time." "No," Jonas said, "we don't." He set the guns on the table. The others stared. Even Mira, half-conscious, blinked toward the weapons as if understanding the meaning of their presence. "You know they won't just knock and walk away," Eliza said. "They'll burn this place down if they think you're hiding us." "I know," Jonas replied. He crossed to the window and opened the wooden shutter a sliver. From here, the valley looked peaceful. But the dust trail was closer now, too close. He turned back toward the women. "We either hide or we fight." "There's nowhere left to hide," Eliza said. "Not anymore." Jonas crouched to the floor and handed a revolver to Eliza. She didn't hesitate. Her fingers wrapped around the grip like it belonged there. "You know how to use it?" "Point and pull," she said. "I'm a quick learner." He gave a tight nod and turned to May, who was already sliding bullets into the shotgun's chamber with a precision that told him this wasn't her first time. "What about the others?" he asked. "Irene can aim if needed," May said. "Hester, too. Mira, not yet." Eliza spoke up. "We'll keep her low, out of the crossfire." Jonas moved to the front window, opened it a crack. The riders were clearer now. 6 men, spread in a wide line across the valley floor. They weren't rushing. They were closing in with confidence, like wolves approaching a wounded animal. He turned to Eliza. "When they come," he said, "I'll try to talk them down. Keep them from getting too close. But if they cross the line, then we fight." He nodded. "What if they just burn the place?" Irene asked from the corner, her voice shaking. Jonas paused. "Then we don't let them get that far." They went quiet. Outside, the sound of hooves now carried on the wind. Real, undeniable. "Traps," Jonas muttered suddenly, and rushed out the back door. In the clearing behind the cabin, he yanked up old tripwire snares, rebaited them, rigged a few bottles as noise alarms near the fence posts. His hands moved fast, years of instinct kicking in. This wasn't just his home anymore. It was a last stand. By the time he returned inside, the riders had crested the final ridge. "Positions," he said. "No one fires unless I do first." Eliza slid to the side of the door. May crouched near the back window. Irene covered Mira with a blanket, then grabbed a hammer and clutched it like a prayer. Jonas stepped onto the porch as the 6 riders fanned out. The man in the center, tall, black coat, silver badge glinting, tipping his hat like this was a social visit. "Afternoon," Marshal Silas Granger called out. Jonas didn't blink. "This is private land," he said. "You're not welcome here." The 5 riders behind Granger fanned out slowly, forming a half circle that boxed Jonas in like he was the one under suspicion. Their movements were fluid, practiced, not the twitchy swagger of amateurs, but the calm readiness of men who'd seen violence up close and grown comfortable with it. Jonas kept his rifle pointed low, but ready. Granger remained mounted. He looked down at Jonas with the easy arrogance of a man who wore a badge not for justice, but as a license. "Hear tell some fugitives came through this way," he said, voice lazy but clear. "Girls, 5 of them, maybe 6, depending on who's counting." "I haven't seen anyone," Jonas replied. Granger smiled, a predator's grin. "That's so?" "Nearest trail's 20 miles east." "No one comes here by accident." The marshal dismounted in one smooth movement, his boots landing with a thud that stirred the dust. "Well," Granger said, brushing his coat aside to reveal a gleaming revolver at his hip, "lucky I don't believe in accidents." Jonas didn't flinch, but inside his mind was racing. He had no doubt Granger knew exactly who was inside the cabin. The man wasn't here to search, he was here to assert control, to intimidate, to bait Jonas into revealing more than he wanted to. Granger took a slow step forward. "See, I got myself a problem," he said. "My employers paid good money for those women. Contracts, signatures, legal channels. They owe debts. You wouldn't be interfering in lawful recovery efforts, would you, Mr. Callen?" Granger's eyes sparkled with mock recognition. "Jonas Callen," he said. "Now there's a name I haven't heard in a spell." He looked over his shoulder at his men and chuckled. "Boys, we're standing on the land of the man who vanished after his wife ran off with a bottle and bad company. Ain't that something?" Jonas felt his jaw clench. "That's not what happened." Granger turned back, still grinning. "Course not. That's just the story folks tell when a man up and disappears instead of facing his failings." He took another step. Close now, too close. Jonas lifted the rifle slightly, a silent warning. "You'll want to stop there," he said. Granger's smile faded just a fraction. "Or what, Callen? You gonna shoot a federal marshal on his own errand?" "If that errand includes trespassing and threatening my life," Jonas said, voice calm but hard, "then yes, I might." Granger stopped, one boot on the bottom step of the porch. His hand hovered near his belt, not yet drawing, but not idle either. "I don't think you understand the stakes here," he said. "These girls, they're property, documented, stamped by 3 territories. You're harboring fugitives from a lawful debt collection." Jonas's voice was a steel whisper. "There's nothing lawful about what you do." Granger laughed. "That's rich, coming from a man who ran away from the law and let his wife take the fall." Behind the door, Jonas heard the faint creak of floorboards. One of the women was shifting, maybe listening, maybe readying a weapon. He hoped they held back. He needed to buy time. "I'm giving you a warning," Jonas said. "Leave, now." "You're going to get yourself killed over what?" Granger stepped up another stair. "A handful of ruined women? They're not your responsibility." "They are now." The words surprised even Jonas, the way they came out firm, final, like a verdict. Granger's face changed. No more smirks, no more mockery, just a calculating coldness that replaced everything. "You think this is about them?" he said. "This is about order, control, civilization. You let women run wild, speak out, rebel. You get chaos. That's what we're fixing." Jonas shook his head. "You're not fixing anything. You're feeding off fear." Granger's hand twitched toward his gun. Jonas didn't move. From the window, a voice called out. "Eliza," it said. It was Mira, weak but defiant. "They're not his girls," she continued. "They're our sisters, and we're done being silent." Granger turned his head slightly, surprised to hear another voice, a girl's voice. That hesitation gave Jonas the edge. "Leave," he said again, rifle steady. "This is your last chance." Granger stared. Behind him, his men began shifting nervously in their saddles. "Marshal," one called, "we didn't sign up for a bloodbath on a bluff." Granger's jaw flexed. "Stand down," he barked. Then to Jonas, "This isn't over." He stepped back slowly, then mounted his horse without breaking eye contact. "We'll return," he said, "with warrants and fire." Jonas didn't reply, only watched them go. When the last horse vanished over the ridge, he let the breath out. Then turned, opened the cabin door. Inside, 5 women stared at him. No longer just survivors, allies. The cabin was silent after Granger's departure, but it wasn't peace that settled in. It was pressure. Jonas paced near the hearth, hands shaking with restrained fury. The rifle rested on the table, still loaded, untouched. Around him, the women moved quietly, tending to Mira, checking water, straightening blankets, but always watching him. He could feel it. Their hope, their fear, their silent question. What will he do now? Jonas stared at the cracked mirror above the fireplace. What he saw wasn't the hermit he'd tried to become, not anymore. "I know that man," he said suddenly, his voice rough, like he hadn't used it in years. They looked up. "Eliza," he continued, "when you said Marshall Granger sold those women, Annie was one of them." She nodded, slow and cautious. "She told me about you before she died." Jonas swallowed hard. "She told me you weren't a coward, that you'd come for her, that you just didn't know where to look." His shoulders sank. "I knew," he whispered. "I just didn't have the guts to face what it would cost. I chose quiet. I chose safety." He stepped toward the trapdoor in the floor, the place he'd hidden his pain, his past, and now their salvation. "But today," he said, "when I saw Granger's eyes on you, when I saw the fear in Mira's face, I was right back where I stood the day they took Annie." He paused, one hand on the wood grain of the trapdoor. "I didn't fight then, and I lived with that silence every damn day since." He looked around the cabin, no longer a tomb of grief, but a shelter with meaning. No more hiding, no more silence. He pulled the trapdoor open, revealing the second cache. Old rifles, a longer-range repeater, boxes of ammunition, a battered field map with defensive positions marked in red pencil. The women gathered around, silent. "What's the plan?" Eliza asked. Jonas met her gaze. "We make this valley a place they won't forget. They come for war, we'll give them a reckoning." He handed her a rifle. This time, the hand that offered it didn't tremble. And for the first time since 1884, Jonas Callen didn't feel alone in his fight. Marshal Silas Granger's spurs jingled as he stepped onto Jonas's porch, boots thudding twice before he paused, hand hovering near his revolver. The ranch house, once a quiet tomb of solitude, now felt like a stage awaiting its reckoning. Jonas stood his ground on the top step, rifle steady in his hands despite the muscles coiled beneath his shirt. Sunlight flickered between the wooden slats, dancing across Granger's badge. Something Jonas had once admired before it became a symbol of betrayal. "This is private land," Jonas said, voice low but firm. "You're trespassing." Granger smirked, shoulders relaxed. "Maybe so," he drawled, "but I've got orders to collect freight. Human freight. 5 runaway servants owned by men in 3 territories. I figure you're hiding them." One of Granger's men, a grizzled cowboy with a scar across his cheek, laughed softly. Jonas's jaw clenched. "Afraid not," Jonas replied. "There's only me out here." Granger took a step closer. "Don't try my mercy, Callen. These women owe debts. They signed papers. Marshall's word is law." He tipped his hat sideways like a predatory wink. Jonas inhaled sharply. He could feel it reverberate in his chest, the sound of years of refuge crashing into dust. The world had narrowed to a single choice: fight or watch everyone die. From inside the house, a voice cut through, clear, furious. "Eliza!" Mira's whisper turned into a clarion call. "Annie didn't call his name. She cursed yours." In that moment, Jonas's world snapped. The tone shifted from negotiation to confrontation. Granger stiffened. Jonas's heart thumped like war drums. Granger squared his shoulders, voice low and cold. "Your wife wasn't some saint," he said.
"She was breaking the law, fighting us, cost her her life, cost you your family." "No," Jonas said, stepping down to stand toe-to-toe, "you cost her life." Eliza appeared behind him in the doorway, shotgun at her side. Shadows curved around her face, bruises highlighted by the afternoon light. "You're a coward, Granger," she called out. "We're not property, we're people." Granger's lips curled, his eyes glinting. "Really?" He looked at her weapon. "Pointing a gun at a lawman? That'll get you a hanging faster than any debtor's rope." Jonas spoke again. "We're done running," he said. Then, with a deliberate gesture, he slung his rifle under arm and pressed his palm against the faded badge taped above the doorway, an emblem of himself. He tore it off, letting it flutter to the dusty floor. The act was quiet, symbolic, a man stripping away his past to stand for something more profound. Granger's face blanched, his stance faltered. Another of his men, the scarred one, reached for his gun. Granger snapped at him to hold. Jonas scanned the valley. The rebellious hum of possibility wrung his senses. The air turned electric. Then Granger raised one hand. "I'm not here to kill," he said. "I'm here to enforce the law." He paused. "Back down, Callen, and I promise you'll walk away. Hurt no one, and I'll leave." His tone bore the weight of both menace and a challenge. Jonas's breath slowed, the rifle now steady at his side. Silence stretched, a taut wire over the canyon. One wrong move. Then Jonas finally spoke, voice calm but resolute. "If law is the shield you hide behind, then I'll be the sword to break that shield, today." What's driving Jonas more, guilt or justice? Share your thoughts below. The real fight's just beginning. He squeezed the rifle's grip slowly, no flicker of hesitation. Granger stared, his hand trembling ever so slightly. His facade cracked. For a heartbeat, both men measured each other. One man who built walls to forget, another who wore a badge to forget nothing. The world seemed to pause. And then the clash. Soft footsteps behind Jonas, the quiet click of shotguns being shouldered. They were ready. This was the moment that decided it all. Inside the battered cabin, silence loomed heavy after the standoff outside. Jonas stepped back in, his breath ragged, the barrel of his rifle still warm. Dust swirled through broken slats where bullets had kissed the frame. Eliza sat on the edge of the table, her shirt soaked with blood that wasn't hers. Her knuckles were white around the shotgun still resting in her lap. Her eyes, though sunken with exhaustion, were clear and locked on Jonas. "I didn't mean to speak out there," she said hoarsely. "But he lied, about Annie, about everything." Jonas didn't move. The name alone sent a tremor through him. "You said she cursed him?" His voice barely rose above a whisper. Eliza nodded. "Granger didn't just take her. He broke her in front of us, beat her until she couldn't scream anymore. And still, she never begged for him." Jonas's knees buckled, and he sat down on the bench across from her. His hand rested on the rifle, but it had become a meaningless weight. He stared at the floorboards as if trying to see through them to the past. "I thought," he began, then stopped. "I spent 3 years believing she called for me when she died, that I failed her because I ran." Eliza leaned forward, voice gentler now. "She never blamed you, not once. She told us you would come, that you'd find us." Jonas looked up. His face, so long hardened by guilt and silence, softened with the ache of redemption just out of reach. "She believed that?" he asked. "She swore on your name." Eliza's voice caught. And when he hit her that last time, the thing she shouted was his.
She died cursing Granger, not crying for rescue. The silence between them grew dense, as if holding its breath. Jonas pressed a hand to his chest, feeling the familiar hollow where grief had lived so long. Now it was something else, a wound reopening, but not to bleed, to breathe. Outside, the wind picked up. The sun dipped behind a red ridge, casting long shadows across the sand. Eliza placed a hand on his shoulder, firm despite her fatigue. "You didn't fail her, Jonas. You just weren't done yet." In that moment, something shifted inside him, the weight of a lie lifting, replaced by the unbearable truth. He hadn't been too late. He'd just taken too long to come back to himself. He stood slowly, glanced at the broken door, the shattered windows, and the dying light. Then he looked at Eliza, at the others huddled behind overturned furniture, still breathing, still fighting. "Then I won't fail again," he said. And this time it wasn't just a vow, it was a reckoning. Jonas stood tall on the porch, rifle in hand, watching as the dust cloud finally birthed 6 riders into view. At the lead, Silas Granger. Towering in the saddle, a lawman's badge glinting on his chest like a lie made of metal. "Afternoon," Granger called out. His voice was too calm, too easy. "Heard you might have had some unexpected company." Jonas said nothing. The others dismounted behind Granger, spreading like oil around the yard, well-armed, confident. Granger stepped forward, boot heels crunching dry dirt. "You know how it is. Property goes missing. Hard-working men like us just trying to make things right." "You've got no rights here," Jonas replied. "This is private land." Granger's smile twisted. "That's so. Then why do I smell fear?" Jonas didn't blink. He kept the rifle raised, but not yet aimed. From inside the cabin, Mira let out a soft groan, just loud enough to carry. Granger's eyes narrowed. "Now what was that?" "A broken window," Jonas lied.
Storm damage. One of the gunmen moved toward the porch steps. Jonas didn't hesitate. He chambered around with a deafening click. "Don't," Jonas said. Granger raised a hand, holding his men back. "Let's not make this a mess." "You already did," Jonas replied. From behind him, the door creaked open slightly. Eliza's voice rang out, sharp as a bell. "She didn't cry for you, Granger. Annie cursed you." Granger stiffened, recognition flickering. "Who said that?" "I did." Eliza stepped into view, her shotgun resting against the doorframe. Her dress was stained with blood and dust, but she stood tall. Granger's mask slipped. Rage bloomed in his eyes. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I was there. We all were, and now we're not afraid." That was the moment. Jonas raised the rifle, aimed directly at Granger's chest. "This is your last chance," he said. Granger opened his mouth, maybe to shout, maybe to curse. Jonas fired. The shot cracked through the canyon like thunder. Granger reeled backward, clutching his chest. His badge clattered to the dirt before he did. Then the valley exploded. Heart-pounding, like this video. This is where the legend truly begins. Gunfire erupted from both sides. One of Granger's men screamed and went down near the fence. Another returned fire, bullets tearing through the porch post beside Jonas. He dropped behind the railing, working the lever of his rifle with speed born of survival. Inside, May fired from the window with a revolver Jonas had handed her minutes before. Her shot caught a man in the shoulder, spinning him sideways. Mira, pale and trembling, crawled across the floor, clutching spare rounds in her blood-streaked hands. "More bullets!" she cried. Jonas caught the pouch she slid toward him. "Good girl," he muttered, teeth clenched as he reloaded. From the back door, Eliza appeared again, this time with a double barrel. She leveled it at a gunman approaching from the side and fired both barrels.
The man flew back in a burst of dust and blood. But the attackers weren't retreating, not yet. They regrouped behind the barn, shooting in bursts. The cabin groaned under fire. One window shattered completely, sending glass flying. Jonas ducked instinctively as a bullet whined past his ear. "We can't let them surround us," he yelled. "Eliza," May called, "they're flanking left." "I see 'em." Eliza darted across the narrow hallway, reloading as she moved, heart hammering like a war drum. The left flank was crumbling. 2 men had broken from the rear and were circling the cabin's blind spot. She reached the back window just in time to see one of them raise his rifle. Bang! She fired through the glass. The shot hit low, splintering his thigh. He screamed and fell, writhing in the dirt. His partner ducked behind a trough. "Jonas," she shouted, "one down, one hiding." Jonas didn't respond. He was too busy fending off the frontal assault. 2 more gunmen were advancing through the sagebrush, crouched low and firing in quick succession. The front porch was shredded, wood splintered, boards hanging by nails. Inside, Mira lay near the hearth, trying to press a cloth to her side where a stray bullet had grazed her ribs. Her fevered eyes fluttered, but her fingers still gripped the pouch of cartridges. May crouched beside her, whispering reassurance, even as her own hands shook from recoil. "Stay with me, sweetheart. Almost done." Jonas reloaded again. His knuckles were raw, breath coming in ragged bursts. Granger's body lay splayed beneath the steps, unmoving. But his death hadn't ended the fight. It had only enraged the others. From the rear, another volley tore through the walls. A shot thudded into the table beside Mira. Dust and fragments flew. May screamed, shielding the girl with her body. "They're falling back," Eliza called, ducking as return fire clipped the frame above her. "But they're not gone yet." "No," Jonas growled, glancing out the shattered window. He saw it. The hesitation, the regrouping. The last 3 men had taken cover behind the tool shed and corral. "They're planning something. We hold tight." Silence fell, too sudden. Then a whoosh. Smoke began to pour in through the back window. "They lit the barn!" Eliza shouted. Flames leapt skyward, licking the roof beams. The wind carried smoke straight toward the cabin. Mira coughed violently. May pulled her closer to the floor. "They're gonna burn us out," Jonas spat, "like animals." "No," Eliza said firmly. She tossed him a second shotgun. "Like women who won't be chained again." Jonas nodded. He looked at them. Eliza with fire in her eyes. May shielding a wounded girl with her bare body. Not victims, not anymore. He kicked open the front door. Gunfire greeted him, but he was already rolling. The second shotgun roared, sending another attacker crashing into the fence post. "2 left," he yelled. Eliza followed close, taking the right. Her next shot missed, but it pinned the last shooter long enough for Jonas to cross to cover. Together, they moved like cogs in a clock, ragged, bloody, but coordinated. May appeared behind them, Mira's revolver clutched in white-knuckled hands. "For Annie," she whispered, and fired. The shot went wide, but it forced the last man from cover, straight into Eliza's sights. Bang! Silence. Only the crackle of fire remained. Smoke rose, stinging their lungs and eyes. Jonas lowered his gun slowly, breathing hard. Around him, the women stood still, stunned, scorched, alive. Behind them, the cabin groaned but held. He turned, eyes falling on Granger's lifeless form. His badge, bent and bloodied, gleamed dully in the dirt. Jonas stood in the settling dust, the weight of the rifle still in his hands, but his fingers loosening, as if finally releasing something far older than the weapon itself. Granger's body lay twisted beneath the porch steps, one arm flung out, badge cracked and half buried in the sand.
The other attackers were either sprawled motionless around the yard or had vanished into the haze of retreat, their silhouettes fading behind smoke and defeat. The barn continued to burn, but the wind had shifted mercifully. Embers spiraled upward, not toward the cabin, but out into the open valley, away from what remained of their sanctuary. Jonas dropped to one knee beside Granger. For a long moment he said nothing, only stared at the man who had once been the embodiment of unchecked power and corruption. The man who'd stolen Annie from him, who had profited from the suffering of so many. He reached down and picked up the badge. The once shining star, now dull and scorched, weighed heavily in his palm. Not from its metal, but from what it had once represented, a twisted mockery of justice. He let it fall back into the dust. Behind him, Eliza limped toward the porch, cradling her left arm. "They're gone," she said hoarsely. "We held them off." Jonas turned to her, his eyes shadowed but steady. "Not just held them off, we ended it." May emerged next, Mira leaning weakly on her shoulder. The girl looked feverish still, but her eyes were clear and dry for the first time since she'd arrived. Jonas looked at them all, burned, battered, but standing. Survivors. A groan came from the cabin's interior as a broken beam gave way and clattered to the floor. Jonas winced. The home he had guarded so fiercely for years was little more than a ruin now. Holes in the walls, shattered windows, blood on the floor. But somehow it no longer felt like a tomb. "We'll rebuild," Eliza said softly, as if reading his thoughts. "If you want us here." Jonas hesitated. For the first time in years, he didn't know what he wanted, only that hiding was no longer an option. "You saved us," whispered, her voice cracking. "But more than that, you believed us." Jonas looked to the sky. Morning light was starting to creep over the ridge. The night was over. He nodded once, slowly. No one should have to beg to be believed. Behind him, the badge glinted in the rising sun before the wind finally buried it. 3 months had passed. The scorched ruins of Jonas's old cabin had long since faded into memory, replaced by fresh wood and hopeful voices. He now lived on the edge of New Haven, a modest town nestled near the green hills of northern Arizona. Not much, but enough for a second chance. The women had healed. Mira, once trembling and fevered, now walked without assistance, helping to gather books and slate boards. May had stopped sleeping with a rifle under her pillow. Eliza, though still bearing scars on her arms, stood at the center of the effort, strong, unshakable, tireless. Together, they had begun to build something entirely new. It started with an abandoned chapel. Jonas had found it on the edge of town, half sunken and caked in moss. No one had used it in years. He asked no permission, just started repairing the roof one morning, alone. Within days, the women joined him. Nails, hammers, sandpaper, no words, just motion. Within weeks, it had become a school. Children came first out of curiosity, drawn by Mira's singing or May's laugh. Then they returned with their friends, and eventually with notebooks, asking, "Will there be lessons tomorrow?" There always were. Jonas worked quietly in the background. He rebuilt every desk with his own hands, sanding each corner smooth, carving initials when asked. He carved a bell frame from pine and hoisted it with Eliza's help. It rang twice every morning, echoing across the fields like a promise. New Haven began to change, too. Locals who had once eyed Jonas with suspicion now brought him planks, tools, sometimes just coffee and silence. He didn't talk much, still preferred the steady rhythm of work to conversation, but he smiled now, often. The school had no name, not officially, but among the children it was called Annie's house. One morning, as they finished placing new window panes, Eliza looked out across the yard. Children were chasing each other between saplings. Mira sat under a tree, reading aloud to 2 small boys. The sunlight turned her hair golden. Eliza turned to Jonas, wiping sweat from her brow.
"You never said why you came with us." He didn't answer at first. He was tightening the final bolt on a child's desk, shoulders hunched like a sculptor. "I didn't come with you," he said finally. "I followed you. There's a difference." She smiled faintly. "And now?" Jonas stood up, brushing sawdust from his hands. "Now I build." Outside, the bell rang twice. Children ran toward the door, laughter like birdsong. Eliza stepped aside to let them in. Jonas lingered at the doorframe, hand resting on the wood he had shaped, sealed, made his own. He didn't need to speak it aloud. This was his atonement. This was home. That evening, as the final orange hues of dusk brushed across the window panes, Jonas sat alone at the back of the chapel-turned-schoolhouse. The benches were empty now, save for the echoes of the day's laughter. His hands rested on his knees, still marked with calluses and flecks of dried paint. Eliza stepped in quietly, brushing wind from her shawl. She carried a small tin box, one Jonas had seen before but never opened. She approached slowly, hesitantly, as if sensing a weight in the room that couldn't be measured in silence. "I've been meaning to give this to you," she said, setting the box beside him. He looked up, puzzled. But when he opened it, he stopped breathing. Inside was Annie's wedding ring. Jonas stared at it for a long time, as if it might vanish if he blinked. "Where did you find this?" "She gave it to me," Eliza whispered. "Said if anything happened, if you ever found us, I should return it to you." His fingers brushed the gold. It was worn smooth along one side, the side she used to twist when she was nervous. "I kept it," Eliza continued, "not because I wanted to keep her from you, but because I didn't think I'd live long enough to give it back." Jonas closed the box gently. "You lived, because you fought." Eliza sat beside him. Her voice was steadier now. "She believed in you, in who you were, who you could still be." He nodded slowly, then reached into his coat pocket. From within, he pulled out a second object, a chain. At the end of it, his own ring, dulled by years in the Arizona dust. "I thought I buried this," he said. "Turns out I just hid it from myself." He opened Eliza's hand and placed Annie's ring inside it. "It's not to replace her," he said. "I know that." Eliza's eyes filled with tears. "It's to finish a promise that death interrupted." She looked at him, lips trembling. "What kind of promise?" "One that says we build something from the ashes, together." For a long moment she didn't answer. Then she leaned forward and laid her head gently against his shoulder. The chapel bell outside chimed once, caught by the evening breeze. Morning light spilled gently through the newly installed windows, casting golden stripes across the classroom floor. The children sat at their desks, heads bowed over slate boards, lips moving in unison. Eliza said Annie was brave. Jonas stood at the back of the room, hands folded behind him. He didn't interrupt, he just listened. The rhythm of their voices, uneven, honest, full of breath, sounded like music to him. A breeze swept in through the open window, ruffling the curtains and rustling the stack of books on the teacher's desk. Outside, a bird called once. The wind carried the scent of wild grass and cedarwood. Jonas closed his eyes, and for a brief, quiet moment, he heard her. "I'm proud of you, Jonas," Annie whispered in the wind. "You came back." He opened his eyes and smiled. The bell rang. Another day had begun. In the dust and silence of the Old West, Jonas Callen taught us something timeless, that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing to build something better from the pain. That standing up, even when it's hard, can change more than just your own fate. It can rewrite the story for others. And that even in the loneliest places, connection is always possible if we dare to open the door. In a world still full of injustice and silence, maybe the courage of one quiet man from a forgotten valley can remind us all, it's never too late to do what's right. This is more than a Western. This is one of many true Wild West stories, real legends, real grit, and real heart, for those of us still fighting for meaning today. Subscribe, like, and join us for the next chapter, because out here, history still echoes. And some stories, they never ride off into the sunset.